Hello, hello, hello. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Excellent. My partner was just in the kitchen and I was like, "Get out. I need to start my recording session."
Right.
Cooking. I was like, "No, no, not right now." Um,
How you
yeah, no,
doing
I'm,
today?
I'm glad to be here. I am had a great weekend and we had family in town and they actually just left today, so we kind of reset the house. It can be after you've had guests, you're kind of like, I'm happy
Yeah,
to see you. I'm also really happy that you're leaving. That's
exactly. I know exactly what that feels like. Yep.
exactly. So yes, today is the day. Again, I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of this. This podcast is definitely a passion project for me, and the longer that I get to do it, the more people that I get to talk to, it just really, I know, is just expanding my
Yeah.
experience, getting to know people. And I know that it also benefits the listeners in the end. So I just want to say thank you again. We are gonna record. I'm recording here, of course, on Zoom, and then I'm also recording on my end on
Hmm.
another app that we'll use, for the audio and stuff for later. But I also just want to get us
Yeah.
fully just grounded in our bodies before we move into our conversation. For me, meditation is my favorite medium of connection. So I just want to just invite you to take a couple of deep breaths, just get comfortable in your body, just kind of invite your whole and complete self into this moment so that we can move
Hmm.
the conversation in a really beautiful and very authentic and also fun and relaxing way. So let me just move this out of my way and we'll get started. Hold on for just one brief second. Okay. Okay. All
Thank you
right.
for that invitation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, as we get started, I'm gonna give you the mic, so to speak, and just give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to the listeners and the viewers, and just by sharing your name, your pronouns, and where you're from.
Great. Excellent. My name is Nalo. I use any pronouns respectfully. And I am a queer Black multi-creator, I'll say. Um, I am a Black masculinity scholar by trade, trans-masculinist, a writer, um, community believer, and someone who aspires toward change in the world. So a shapeshifter, change maker, bridge gapper, whatever else you could throw in there. I just love community. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, where in the world are you recording from today?
I'm recording from Detroit, Michigan.
Okay. Now, are you from Detroit originally, or where is that home for you?
No, no, yeah, Detroit is home for me currently. My partner and I live together here, but I was born in the DMV and raised between New York and the DC area. So,
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
I got to spend some time in DC over the last couple of years while my partner was stationed there. She's in the Navy and she was stationed at an assignment linked to the Pentagon. And so we stayed in Alexandria for a couple of
yeah,
years. So just like
yeah.
right outside of DC. And it was great. I'd only been to visit before. And so it was still,
Hmm.
there was a little bit of magic and mystery about the district, I guess the city. Or is it considered a city? I don't know. I know it's not a state,
Yeah,
but it's
right. It's a district. So
okay.
it's,
Hence
yeah, just
the name.
serving as the capital. It's the only real rule breaking kind of thing like that in the
Okay.
United States.
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. I just remember one of the things that stood out to me when I was there is seeing the license plates, people's license plates that had this bumper sticker or this phrase that said
Mhm.
taxation without representation. And I remember asking about that, and I was like, what the hell does that mean? But then it was explained to me that because it is a district, it is not a city nor a state, that it doesn't have the same legislative rights as the rest of the country does, which is kind of bizarre when you think about.
To be the capital of the nation at that, but that's
Exactly.
another
That's
podcast
that's
episode.
a whole nother podcast. But yeah, so in the time that I was there, I did a lot of very touristy things and went to the mall, National Mall, got to see all the monuments. And I would definitely say my favorite place to go, which I got to go to frequently, was, the Black Museum, also known as the Smithsonian
Hmm.
African American Museum. And it was definitely an impactful experience for me. So I'm glad I got to spend time there. DC was never really on my radar of a place to go, let alone a place to live within. So I'm glad that I got to experience that. So,
Yeah, Chocolate City. That's where
right.
we at.
That's what
Queer culture, Black culture is all up in DC.
everywhere,
Yeah.
everywhere. I mean, I was genuinely blown away. I'm from Southern California originally, and
Hmm.
I spent some time in North Carolina and Texas and New York for a little while. And so being in DC was, like you said, chocolate city. Like I went to Ben's Chili Bowl. I got to
That's
actually
right.
meet the woman who was, the original owner of the space. She was there that day, and I was just like, whoa. I had not seen so many Black people in one particular concentrated area, I think, in my
So
life.
good. Ben's Chili Bowl is that stuff too. That the you went to the U Street location downtown.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that's it right there.
Yeah.
I
It was
love Ben's Chili Bowl.
absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. So I have a question for you. If someone were to ask you, what do you stand for? What would you say?
I stand for freedom. Period. In every way, shape, or form, I stand for freedom. And to I guess, to kind of break that down a little bit more, it would be to analyze how to coexist with multiple kinds of freedoms at one time. I know and understand that as a Black person, there are limitations around how I experience freedom. As a queer person, there are limitations around how I, practice or experience freedom in my body, in my sexuality, in my identity, and uh, even as a person who is perceived woman and perceived masculine, like there are limitations around how the world is socialized to be able to take that up well. So I think the way that I'm constantly in practice in my own life is to center how I show up in pleasure and what freedom means to me constantly, even when it goes up against the grain of any other human's idea of freedom. It's like I want to figure out how to not harm each other while our freedoms coexist.
Yeah. I like that. How to not harm each other while our freedoms coexist. I think that's
Yeah.
so valuable because I was having a conversation. I have a son who's 19 years old. He's a sophomore at Dillard University. Woo woo. And
Woo
just
woo, New Orleans. That's where I just moved from.
yeah, and just made the dean's list. So I'm like,
Come
overjoyed,
on,
mom
Dean.
pride,
Come on.
And we were having a conversation yesterday, and he and I have really profound conversations about everything. And we were having a conversation about, gender identity and gender representation and, what the freedoms and in those spaces and what those, experiences can look like. And that concept of making sure that your freedoms don't tread on my freedoms so that
Mm,
my freedoms aren't canceling out someone else's freedom. So being able to really
mm,
have freedoms that can exist interdependently, and integrate within each other without anyone feeling like their existence in a freedom-based lifestyle or a freedom-based mindset is being limited by someone else operating in the same way, so
mm-hmm.
that was interesting when you said that. It just reminded me of a conversation I had with him and thinking of that same thing, like what does that look like? Is that a utopian fantasy to be able to or
Mm.
how do we teach that, let alone practice it without completely dismantling, the systems that we currently operate in? Is that
And that's the end all be all question in general. And I think that the biggest part of that is to stay curious and to be like to allow your imagination to go beyond white imagination. Like I am constantly questioning everything I was ever told, everything in my life, everything I call myself, everything that has been named by someone that isn't me. Just to, you know, like, I'm like, am I just being convinced to live a life that is shaped by someone else's imagination or sense of normalcy? Or am I practicing freedom in ways that is kind of like a duality, which is like, I understand how to survive the world that was created without me in mind. And I know who I am outside of this imagination. So I think it's so deeply important to me to stay curious and to understand my understanding of freedom. And I think of freedom as like in a nonviolent discourse. Like I'm not thinking of freedom as like you can abuse any power you want or do whatever you want with anything. You can't. I'm saying paying attention to everything that is alive around you, whether it be from the things growing from the earth and the soil to each of us as human beings. Like I'm saying dismantling hierarchy, and I'm saying sharing space, not who is more valuable and who is disposable. Like those are not freedom ideologies for me. I'm saying, how do we show up to share space on this earth in this time together without committing acts of harm to one another?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think if we're able to introduce these concepts or these ideas and these practices into a youth mind, you know, in the earliest stages of development, to be able to have conversations about these things so that it becomes part of the norm. So by the
Yes.
time my, you know, 3 month old nephew Ziggy is in his 30s, that the world will actually start to look different, because it won't be new thought at that point. It'll
Mm-hmm.
be like, well, this is just how we do things now, you know,
Or trust in Ziggy as a
or
baby. Like the children are the most free.
do
Like
this.
I'd be like, please, we need to like to be able to move in this kind of socialized conditioned society. We had to strip ourselves of so many understandings of freedom to just be like, can't beat them, join a model that they shape all of us into. But like children, they don't be caring. They don't care if they hurt your feelings. They don't care if they like, so that's the difference, is like children are already unapologetically free, absolutely free without condition. And it's like, how do we learn from them as teachers without then also saying they're underdeveloped because they don't know how to behave in a world yet? And I'm like, nah, I'm trying to sit at your feet and learn like what it means to you know, share the world and to be kind. Like children are kind, and they also are passionate with feelings. So sometimes that can look like children are being mean or whatever else. But I think I want to kind of capture the essence of how they are allowed to feel the fullness of the experience of feeling in their bodies, and we direct them to maybe understand how to handle that, because you're always allowed to experience the range of your feeling, but we are never allowed to harm each other in that. But I think children are definitely teachers innately for freedom practice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I was in a clubhouse room the other day, and one of the like closing questions for the end of the conversation was, if you could switch places with any person in the world, who would it be? And I said, my 3 month old nephew Ziggy. I would
Yep,
love to be in his shoes or his little toes for a day, just to have that sense of wonder and limitlessness, and truthfully, like you said, a higher level of understanding of how this world really works, what's really going
mm-hmm,
on, you know, before all the imprinting and all the other programming that kind of seeps in, that strips away that very innate spiritual divine understanding of things that I believe
that's right.
is lost sometimes once you leave that youthful state. So yes, the
Yep,
babies, they know. The babies, they
they be
know. They
knowing.
know. They be know. Exactly. Exactly. So if you think about spirituality, can you tell me what that means for you, what that looks like for you?
That's a great question. For me, spirituality is paying attention to aliveness, whether it be centering presence in your own body, or again, connecting to everything alive around you and knowing that it all has a purpose to sustain every other thing that's alive on the earth. So I think spirituality is also, for me, the interconnectedness of something greater than ourselves. So, you know, there's so many different kinds and you know, genres and everything of spiritual practice and spirituality in and of itself. um And as I kind of think about them as tools rather than, measures for indoctrination, I really feel deeply connected to the greater magic of like evolution and expansion and complexity.
Yeah. Yes. I like how you said not for indoctrination. I think
Mm-hmm.
when I think of spirituality, I feel like it's been entered into conversation more casually, I would say, than maybe, 15, 20 years ago, where, people I've heard people ask the question, are you religious or are you spiritual, or, where do you fit?
Mm-hmm.
And, I grew up I'd say in the church, but in several churches
Mm-hmm.
because, I was born in the 70s. I was baptized Catholic. I went to Catholic schools for most of elementary school. And then by the time I was going into middle school and high school, my parents, who've been together since they were 15 years old, also Catholic school kids, we started going to like Southern Baptist churches. And that was another
Yep.
level of indoctrination. And then by the time I left home to go to college and explore the world as an adult, I was like, I ain't never going back to church again because I took my very first theology class in my sophomore year of college and learned about all these different, world religions, Buddhism and Islam and Hinduism and all these other things. And I said, it kind of sounds like everybody's saying the same basic thing,
Mm-hmm.
just packaging it in a way that makes sense to their audience and
Yeah.
kind of letting it be that. And so now in my, early to mid 40s, I'm recognizing that my connection to this sense of magic, like you said, this sense of awareness of there's something that's bigger than the biggest thing that we can even imagine that's really
Yes.
working this whole world, and my practice of meditation is really something that's given me a chance to tap into that in a really deep
Yep.
way. So,
Mm-hmm.
what are some practices, that you have that have kind of given you a chance to really tap into some of this magic?
I would say loving.
Mhm.
Loving is probably a central practice for me. Not probably, it is a central practice for me. And I think of love as an act of worship, as making space for freedom, making space for right relationship, making space for community, and that small, seemingly small in the space of my life as an anecdote, for this moment, I think of it as like I am actively engaging in a greater conjuring by impacting someone else in love or something else in love. The way I treat my plants and the way I treat my lover are not different. The way that I love my friends and the way that I love my sisters is not different. And so I have a deep relationship to love as spirituality, being a core practice for how I have respect for a person's shaping, what a person has been through, and also that no matter what those things are, a person or anything that is alive is deserving of deep, everlasting love. I also love to meditate. I practice sonic meditations often, which is for me, I will turn on a like what are they called? Like a beta hertz track or different frequencies, things like that. And I will sit with my hands on my thighs, and I'll just like allow myself to make sounds. I will harmonize with the frequency. I'll move within the frequency. I'll allow a spiritual message to come through me in that frequency. And it's really powerful. I have so many recordings, and my partner is always like, you need to make an album or something or share this with the world because it's so beautiful. But I love it as just an active, like it's like a nonverbal communication, like and verbal as in like structured words, but it's just like it's communicating something, even if it's that I'm grieving and releasing that, even if it's that I'm in need and I can't immediately satisfy that longing. It's like it's the release from me, and it also is fueling something someone else needs. So it's like wherever that sound goes, I know it reaches where it's purpose to reach. So those are some of my favorite practices for
I
spiritual.
love that. I love that. The the nonverbal audible
Hmm.
release, it can feel really what's the word I'm looking for? Really carnal in a sense. It's like I just have to get this out. I think of like,
Mm-hmm.
a wolf in the wild, and they howl and they shriek, and they
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
make sounds. I think there's a very animalistic part of us that needs to be able to just release sound out of our
Yeah.
bodies. And
Yes.
oftentimes we've been trained, especially women, have been trained to bring your voice down, don't be so loud, make sure you're not
Yes.
noise, this or that. Or even with kids, why are the kids being so loud? They're being kids, they're being loud. That's what kids do. They're expressing. So I love that. I listen to same. Sometimes I will listen to frequencies, 512, 417, different, binaural
Mm-hmm.
beats and things like that.
Binaural
Sometimes just
beats. That's what I was
yeah,
trying
to
to think
have
of. Yeah.
yeah, I was feeling you, and I was like, I think this is what she's talking about. I use those in meditations as well. Sometimes I'll do the silent meditation. My deepest practice, I would say, or my deepest intentional practice in meditation started when I was introduced to Vipassana. And so these deep, second sight, intuitive styles of meditation,
Mm-hmm.
going out into basically sensory deprivation spaces to be able to just go super, super deep.
Ah, love them.
Once it was amazing, and I had an experience, it was in 2017, where I went out to Joshua Tree, and I was out there for 10 days, and when I was out there, probably about the 4th or 5th day, I had this super clairvoyant experience, and I could see my son doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. I was away, his dad was away, and he had the house to himself. His dad and I have been divorced since he was
Oh,
4 years
yes.
old. So he had the house to himself. He was in his teens. And in my second sight, I saw him dressed all in white, and there were people everywhere. And then I saw sirens and like cop cars.
Hmm.
So when I came home, I said, "What were you doing on this day?" And he's like, "Oh, that's when the party got broken up by the cops." And I was like, haha. So for me, my practice gives me a deeper sense of connection to that intuitive psychic
Yes.
ability, And so recognizing that staying connected to the practice of meditation, staying connected to the practice of getting grounded really helps me always feel that sense of spiritual alignment.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's a necessary part of what I do. So I want to switch gears a little bit and ask you some questions about your activism. Would you kind of tell me a little bit about, you consider yourself an activist, and what are some things that you're really activating right now?
I myself am constantly like I said, I'm always fighting for what freedom looks like. I'm fighting for how to keep love at the center of our lives at all times. And I'm fighting for a sense of community that is non-punitive or violent. So for me, the way that I am practicing, like I like that language of like, what are you activating? Um, it is those things. I want to be able to. I have I am purposed. Like my middle name means one who gathers the people and brings them together.
Mm,
And that's just been such. I am a person who can bridge the gap. And typically, when I go into space or share space or facilitate space with people, or even, what I'm saying, hosting folks in my home, things like that, like back in the good old days, obviously these days. But when I think about stuff like that, I'm thinking about how, we are all constantly learning what it means to love, constantly learning what it means to be in right relationship to one another. And I recognized very young that the universe had blessed me with a language to bridge gaps. And when I say that, I mean like there are often conversations and people that can't be reached by how impacted we are by certain things. And I'm usually a person who has the patience, the know-how to reach those people. And so I'm someone who at the center of my work and my personhood and myself as an activist is to be at the center of love as a universal language for response from those who are shaped by certain limitations or containers that they may be positioned to or neatly fit in comfortably, but also that there is something greater than that they should pay attention to. So I think my activism and what I'm activating is how to use love in the response of like what our freedom looks like together to coexist. Because I can't stop you from believing or thinking what you believe, but I can
Right.
bring attention to how certain connections are harmful to certain people and what we do about it in order to be able to coexist freely amongst one another. So that's a little bit
Right.
about how I understand my activism.
I like that. I like that. Introducing love as a response is is really profound when you think about it, because I think that some are still so programmed to think of love as a weakness or a
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability, or and it does require vulnerability, to really act from a place of love, or to respond from a place of love. Love is also one of the universal truth of this
Yeah.
existence, is that we all exist because of this existence of unconditional, overwhelming, universal, limitless love. And so to be able to weave that into responses to injustice, or responses to even types of oppression, I think that being able to say, okay, let me see how I can approach this in a way that will move us through a loving experience, as
Yep.
opposed to just a combative experience where we're actually not making any progress at all. So I like
Because
that.
that connects so deeply to like abusive power dynamics. It's like I'm not coming at you to prove or to fit you within the binary of innocent, guilty, right or wrong. I'm trying to find the harm and see how we break harm patterns, how we shape possibilities. I'm not like, it does nothing to point my finger at you but make you want to defend yourself, and rightfully so. But I think I don't know that we have many models for meeting harm with support rather than punishment, and or at least not um, allowing love to be part of the conversation of that accountability rather than punishment. And so for me, that's a lot of what's centered in my community work is how do we speak both those languages? Like how do we be accountable to how we're contributing to harm in a particular way, or in the reifying it in the greater world, and also know that we are only yielding to our shaping. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's deeply important to be able to not dehumanize folks as we try to navigate what it means to show up in community and right relationship to one another.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
It's
hard to do. It's hard because we got feelings, okay?
we got feelings, but it seems like such a simple uh, formula to be able to eliminate dehumanization of human beings with love.
Hmm. Hmm.
The one thing that all human beings need to feel alive, to feel
Yeah.
a sense of purpose, to feel a sense of appropriate placement, is to be able to feel a sense of love. So
Yeah.
it trying to go without it, trying to move away from it just seems like a fool's journey. We've been doing it, as a
Yep.
society, and we've
Yep.
been successfully failing at it, in a lot of ways.
Or limited
So
by
it's
it at best, for sure.
exactly, exactly, exactly. So I noticed some pictures in your background of a little one. Tell me a little
Oh
bit more
yes.
that I see.
So this is Evelyn. This is my godchild, and really a really transformation point in my life, a deeply pivotal transformation point, because this child is white, and before her, I have to admit, I was deeply like, white people, y'all over there, I'm over here with my people, and this is what it is. And I've been a nanny on and off for about a decade throughout my life, and this is the last child that I nannied before like COVID took over the world. But something about this child completely changed my life and changed my view of the world and kind of rerouted me back to a time. And I think this was definitely spiritual. I think this was definitely empathic. And I think it was absolutely connected to other lives that I've lived or connections to our ancestry, to a time where before race and before hardship and before oppression, there was joy, there was love, there was deep sense of community, there was our traditions weren't limitations, like all these things. And when I met Evelyn, she was just the sweetest child. She was having trouble latching onto the breast when her mother was breastfeeding. and she was having trouble latching, so she wouldn't eat well. So she was constantly crying, just crying. And we ended up uh, having this relationship that whenever I connected with her, she was just full of ease. As soon as we connected, I didn't have any milk for her, I didn't have anything. I would bring her to her mother to feed. And when she would come back to me, she would just be so sweet. We took walks together every day. We would sing together. We did baby yoga. We would like I would make up songs all the time. And she's all over my Instagram. So anyone who follows me, I know, would see her little life journey or our little time together. And her right before we fully separated, I did my last visit, well, second to last visit at the time with her parents, and they were like, "We want to know if you want to be her godparent." And I was shocked first. That was the first thing, as I was very shocked. But then I was also shocked at myself, because I was like, in order for me to responsibly make room for love in this child, I can't have the same understanding of like, nah, fuck you, white people. Excuse my language, but that's essentially how I was navigating the world. It's like, well, I can have that mindset, but then I have to say no to this child. Like I'm not going to be able to show up for her in a profound way and love her the way that I know I love and engage with love, if I only see her as oppressor or a person that will be able to harm me. And so I was like, I live in a both and then some world, not an either or. So I'm not going to choose, you know what I'm saying, this world's imagination over how I know love to be triumphant over anything. And I embraced her, and this child just continues to change my life. And even when I spoke with her yesterday, her mom's like, she's having meltdowns. So sometimes I'm gonna FaceTime you, but you have to make her more songs on Marco Polo. It's this little video app. And
Oh
so
yeah, I know Marco.
yeah, so I was like, she was like, you guys send her more songs, because that's the only thing that calms her down. As soon as we got on FaceTime, her face just lit up, and she's so cute and smiley. And it's just like, our connection is so far beyond like a container the world could create around us to make us dissonant. And so like, I know how radical I feel about coming up against white systems. I know how I feel about the limitations of the white imagination. Like, whiteness does not limit my own imagination, but I also know that my ability to love will not be stifled because of this world's shaping. I love her. I will always love her. I am her godparent today, and she's the sweetest thing that's ever happened to me, for sure.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing that. That warms my heart. I have a godmother, and I was actually just speaking to her last night. Her and my mom, my two moms is what I call them. And
Hmm.
my godmother was, introduced into my life when I was an infant in a very, traditional Catholic, way at church and the whole vibe or whatever. And
Yeah.
so last night we were talking, and I was, being playful with her, saying, you were ordained by God to be my third parent. Do you understand how serious that is? Because she was joking, and she always says, I don't know why your mom chose me. I don't know why your mom chose me, because they've been friends since they were teens. And my mom was more of a, a meek, good girl, quote unquote. And
Yeah.
my mother was a little more free and a little more, adventurous, a little Libra, she's a Libra as well.
Me
So
too.
she, and she is the best person my mother could have possibly chose to be my godparent. And she is someone who has continued to serve as just a model human being, a representation of love, a representation of freedom, a representation of individuality and creativity. And when
Mm.
I was Evelyn's age, I was having phone calls with my godmother before FaceTime, mind you, but
Yeah.
she was telling me last night how she would get her AT&T long distance phone bill and say, I must have been talking to Keisean a lot this month. And she would say to herself, how can I spend an hour talking to a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old? But we definitely have that beautiful connection, like you said, that goes beyond, form and space and age and any of those things. So that's a really amazing, role and experience that you get to step into. So I know you cherish it,
Thank
and
you.
just know that Evelyn cherishes it as well. And so that's awesome. Oh, I love. I did see the photos. I was like, I'm gonna ask her about this baby because
Yes,
I the questions I want to know. So thank you so much for
of
sharing that.
course, of course.
So there was something that you mentioned on our, questionnaire before this conversation, and it was about this thing that we all know as cancel culture. Would you tell me a
Mm,
little bit about some of your thoughts about cancel culture and how it's really impacting our world, our people in particular?
yes. So there's no, I want to name first before I respond to that. There's no clear cut definition for cancel culture. So it makes it hard to address it in certain ways. But I think cancel culture as abuse and a particular form of justice that produces harm is what I'm against. Not so much uh, cancel culture practices being like at the extreme level ways to get the attention of a person that's pervasively being harmful.
Mm.
But I don't support cancel culture in the ways that it disposes of humans or has created kind of like this reactionary, um, almost mob-like mentality for pulling on humans' attention to things without process or without um, any shaping around, calling in. I would say before calling out. So I have a really deeply, I think my understanding of cancel culture as far as it pertains to mainstream social media and how people who aren't without certain skills or knowledges in a particular capacity um, or even without knowing generally are ignorant to the consequences of what could happen when these things are abused in certain ways um, makes me like push up against cancel culture as a kind of justice at all.
Right.
So for me, I believe that yes, we call people in before we call them out. And I think the calling out is strategized, not just an impulsive thing that is structured around our feelings. I think it impacts survivors and victims to think that that's their only options. I think it's a breakdown in community for a survivor or victim, however you identify, to even have to do the labor of trying to figure out how to do those things because anyone who is healing through harm or needing an accountability practice needs community support. That's not a space that any of us should have to take on ourselves. So the way that cancel culture is currently structured, as far as it pertains to the mainstream harm models, I don't support. And I don't think humans are disposable in that way. And I would like to see community accountability models be structured around support for the harm doer and the person who is harmed.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Community accountability looks and feels a lot different than cancel culture. Because if we think of
Absolutely.
even in our smallest communities, our family communities, there's opportunities where harm has been done, whether knowingly or unknowingly, and
Yeah.
that there's the harmer and the one who's been harmed. And I
Mm-hmm.
think if we navigate within our smallest communities from the standpoint of a loving communal accountability experience so that we can actually learn, evolve, and grow. If we applied that same mentality and that same approach in an expansive way, then there would be no need, nor would there be room, nor would it be celebrated as
Mm-hmm.
cancel being the way to operate. Because
Mm-hmm.
the last thing that I think anyone, needs is to be isolated, to be canceled, to be
Mm-hmm.
removed, or like you said, to be disposed of, a person to be disposed of because of an error in judgment, a poor, behavior that had a negative result. And it doesn't mean that communal accountability or a loving community that holds one and others members of the community accountable for their behaviors is dismissing the severity of the harmful behavior by approaching it from a place of love. The intention, I think, there would be to say, it is because I love you that I want you to recognize the harmful behavior. And the person who's been harmed, it is because I love you that I want you to recognize that you are being seen and that your feelings do matter. but just canceling, that's just,
You
it feels
can't
like
cancel anybody though, too. It's like it's not possible.
are they gonna go?
I think that there are tools. When I think of cancel culture in its most positive sense, I think of it as a set of tools and resources that then in turn get to people who are egregiously abusing resources and still gaining resources in an abundant way. Like I think of an R. Kelly type situation where his money has protected him, his fame has protected him. He got still people to this day protesting for him to, you know, not be held accountable for the harm that he's caused. He is unwilling to
Right.
admit to or to be in right relationship to the people he's harmed. And so as like even thinking about cancel culture, it's like R. Kelly, you wouldn't have gotten his attention without a bunch of people
Right.
strategizing around calling
Right.
him out, a bunch of people then telling their stories, a bunch of community
Right.
moving in the world to try and keep those people safe, et cetera, et cetera. But like an average Joe on, you know what I'm saying, who would be stripped of not just their job, but their access to basic resources. I don't believe people should be homeless, starving, and
Mm,
without community ever in their life for almost anything. I get that
right.
that's like the hardest part about imagining that is that when we're connected on the side of loss or on the side of receiving the harm, it doesn't
Right.
often allow room for us to be able to grieve this thing without a reconciliation of something else, right? Like I
Right.
often, you know, think about the space of like, where are we satisfied with the process of cancel culture? Like, what is satisfiability in cancel culture? Or is it just their death? Is it their homelessness? Is it their disposability? And that's the only kind of pushback I have. So though I think that though I am not someone who supports mainstream understandings of cancel culture, I
Mhm.
do understand how some of the tools that are within it can get the attention of the powerful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, like you said, it's for that practice to be continual, it's what is the end game here? What are we what how do we know when we've been, like you said, how do we know that we've been satisfied? You know, do we want their head on a
Hmm.
platter, their firstborn? Do you want, like you said, homeless? Do you want death? Like what is the end game? And then depending on what that is, does that really resolve the one who's been harmed? Does that soothe the
Hmm.
hurt? Does that heal the trauma? Does it undo what's been done? No.
I don't
You know,
think any form of punishment ever does, right? Like you could send somebody who's murdered someone to prison for 20 years. We've continued a
mhm,
cycle of harm by sending that person. I'm an abolitionist, so we continue a cycle of harm by handing them over to a system that is not actually rehabilitative. We continue the harm
absolutely.
patterns. We create new victims rather than reconciling the harm through healing and support. And then
Right.
the person who has was harmed not only does more often than not, and I'll speak for myself as a survivor of child sexual abuse, like I'm like, nothing changes the fact that that happened. Nothing changes the fact that I grieve that and deal with that. I will for the rest of my life. But also like I know that the way that I want to still be able to respond to it and way I try to practice it in my own life is like, how do I be in right relationship to my healing? And the fact that I don't get to choose what happens to a person whose life I don't care about, like we don't get to. And so you know that's deeply important to me.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. 100%. Also, as a survivor of sexual trauma in my early youth, recognizing that no matter what happened to that other person, it was never going to absolve or resolve the impact of the trauma. That
That's the
responsibility
hardest part. Hmm.
falls on me, you know what I mean? And so yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think that the more that people are willing to have the conversation about what is your end game and how does this actually benefit your healing? How does this actually help you be able to overcome whatever it is that was so harmful? And are we just continuing and perpetuating this chain reaction of I harm you, you harm him, she harms her, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Where does that end? You know,
Right,
where's
right.
that, you know? So
And what do we do to be able to, like, if we do find a place of satisfaction with regards to healing within the harm and moving forward, what
mhm,
happens to the person who committed the harm? What life do they get to live? What does the rest of their life look like? Have we
right.
imagined those possibilities? Or every time they rebuild their life, are we still able to snatch them off their platforms and make sure they don't have no money and call them out for, like, so all those things are still like very murky waters. And I want, you know, I know a lot of really brilliant thinkers who are reimagining and thinking deeply about this. And I'm really grateful, because this is the stuff that I want to see. Like, I want to see people talking about all aspects of continued life and sustaining community, because none of us are without being harm doers, just as none of us are without being harmed. And
Right.
on either side of that, we have to pay attention to the fact that I forget who said this in a book. I heard it on a podcast and I saw it in a book. They referenced a book rather, and they were talking about a person who commits an act of harm is not meeting harm for the first time. Like, so those patterns are continued constantly. And how do we bridge the gap between right relationship in community accountable justice and the continuation of life, because life does go on after harm. And that's so hard. It's been hard for me as a survivor, and it's so hard for so many of us. So I think it just takes a lot of you know, people who have the capacity to continue thinking about these things.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. We are going to switch gears a little
Sure.
bit and
Yeah, I like when you switch gears.
moving into what I like to call, this is my like my fun part of this conversation. I like to play this little, I call it a game, but it's not really a game, but it's fun for me. So it feels like a game. It feels like play. So I'm going to give you a couple of sentences and you get to complete them, taking up as
Okay.
much or as little space as you'd like. So the
Okay.
very first one is, I am happiest when.
When I am shaping my own happiness. I'm happiness when pleasure is at the center of all I have and everything I'm doing, whether that be gratitude, sex, friendships, watering plants, whatever that looks like.
Okay. How about, I know I'm fed up when.
I know I'm fed up when I'm too tired to even cry. So I think it matters a lot to me as an empath who absorbs the energy of the world constantly, that I am in release practice. Because when I get to fed up space, I be irritated and I don't want nobody around me. Don't even breathe over here. I just go into my turtle shell and and stay away from everything. But I try to tend to myself before I get there, because fed upness creates a whole other world of possibilities for violence to yourself and to anything around you. So I'm like, I don't ever want to get to a fed up space.
Understood. Understood. And recognizing what your like telltale signs are that you're getting close to that, and being able to
Absolutely.
implement soothing practices, release practices, whatever's needed. Because I feel you. Yes, I feel
Yep.
you. How about this? I know I've made an impact when.
That's so good. I know I've made an impact when people who are part of my community, who are considered disposable in the world, are transformed right before me. And when I say transformed, I mean, um, after so much resistance to a thing, they've been open to the possibilities of how it can change their lives. And that includes, you know, people, I've seen people who have been homophobic their whole lives be completely
Mhm.
transformed and fight for, you know, queer rights and policy. I've seen people who are in the church, you know, because I was raised in the Pentecostal church, and come around and actually want to be in right relationship with my humanity. And this is what keeps me doing this work, is like to see transformation happen is
Mhm.
just, oh man, it's a drug like no other. Keep you in the work for sure.
Yes, it does. It keeps you in the work because it's it's the evidence, it's like universe source showing proof, like, yep, keep going. See, person
Yep.
transformed, see, heart open, see, mind change. Like just keep going. It
And where
serves
them
for the
statistics at? Where them at?
yeah,
Y'all could tell us how many people going to prisons and doing this and doing that, but how many, like, like, what's the percentage of people who are transformed by love? We ain't got no statistics for that.
exactly. Who's responsible for that research and quantifying?
I'm
Who
just
is
saying.
doing those numbers? What is that looking like? I agree
Exactly.
wholeheartedly. Okay, so the next one is, I want to be known for my.
Oh, I want to be known for my ability and capacity to shapeshift, to love, to change the world, um, to change how people view healing.
Mhm.
And I want to be known for my own transformative kindness, because I was an angry, just I say just even 2 years ago, I would drag
Mm,
you head to toe because I could tell you any book, I could reference anything, I could weaponize any content,
mhm.
and you probably couldn't tell these days I'm much more gentle, but I
Okay,
definitely it's a lot, definitely a lot I've learned. So I want to be known for my kindness. I want to be known for as the evidence of transformation.
I love that. I love that. And I like to hear that people had a before story, what my son will call an origin story.
Yeah,
Because a lot of times, we get to a certain point in our development, and that's when we really create an expansive platform and we become more visible and people know our names and so on and so forth. But sometimes they don't know that this story also had a beginning that didn't look like what it is
yeah,
right now. And to be able to recognize that and to say, I want to be known for who I am now, and also for people to know there was a place, there was a time, there was a person that existed before me, so people can
yeah,
see the capability, like you said, being a representation of transformation. So the last
exactly.
one I have for you is I showed myself love today by.
Today, that's a great question. I showed myself love today by affirming my masculinity. So, and I mean that to say, for so much of my life, I've connected myself to my masculine energy in a very complex and in-depth way.
Mhm.
But the world around me can't really hold me often because it's constantly trying to connect me in some way to patriarchy. But
Yeah.
today I like really affirmed myself via my journal and was like my masculinity is so different than the world can even contain or hold with language because it's gendered. Like the world has gendered it. It's like what is masculinity before we decided or men decided that that energy belonged to them and then shaped and created power dynamics around it. How do we harness and understand the tools, resources, and access that masculinity affords the people that embody it rather than using it to weaponize one another and keep people bound to a particular power construct that doesn't even completely serve men, if you ask me. So
Yeah.
um, I affirm my love for myself by also, recognizing that my masculinity is very much alive. I cannot be emasculated, and that the world in and of itself may not be able to hold me, but I have to know how I am so much more free than the limitations of the world. So that reminder.
Yes. Yes. Oh yeah. I affirm you in that affirmation of self. I love that. I love that. Well,
Thank
before
you.
I release this conversation, I like to end each of my podcast episodes with a little mini oracle reading. I have a deck of oracle cards here, and it is the Oracle of E, and it's a really fun, lighthearted deck, and it has
Hmm.
exactly 52 cards in the deck. So the invitation is for you to select a number between 1 and 52.
My spirit just said 33.
33. All right, let me pull that one out of here. And what's cool is that there's a little guidebook that comes with each card. I mean, that comes with the deck and gives a little more insight on each card. But the number for 33, the message is open your presence. Open open your presence. Who doesn't like to open presents, right? So, I'm
Right.
going to read a little bit from the guidebook, and the message, open your presence. Have you ever seen a time lapse of a flower blooming, its petals opening wide? That's your new role model. Visualize yourself opening your arms wide,
Mm.
embracing all the prosperity and abundance that's flowing your way. Receive, 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 and then pass it on.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was really amazing and probably a gentle reminder I needed.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Well, this has been a pleasure and a privilege. I have enjoyed spending the last, couple of minutes chatting with you and just getting to know a little bit more about, who you are, what you stand for. Thank you for being so vulnerable and so open. And I appreciate your passion and your commitment to showing us how to speak and operate and move from a place of love in a very intentional and a very activational way. And I think that
Yeah.
if you continue to do the work that you're doing, you will continue to have an impact on this world in a way that is not easily going to be forgotten. So I'm just grateful for your presence and everything that you do. I'm so excited. So thank you again for saying yes to being a part of this.
Listen, please, the pleasure is mine. I am so, so grateful we got to connect. This is one of the reasons I love Clubhouse. This is probably my sixth podcast booking since I jumped on Clubhouse. It's really, really great. And I'm so grateful for how all of these different apps have created community in a time when we can't really be in person that often. So thank you so much for having me. I really do feel honored to have even been selected, especially so soon. I think we spent one or two rooms together and you were like, I think you'd be great for my podcast. And I felt so honored by that. So thank you so much for your time as well.
Absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure. Well, enjoy the rest of your day and your week, and just continue to be blissful and be blessed in everything that you do.
Thank you, Keisean. Take care of yourself.
You too. Okay. Peace.
Peace.